You find yourself in the shadows of Greenwich Palace on a scorching July morning in 1588. The air is heavy with the mingled scent of unwashed bodies, rotting rushes on the floor, and the sweet perfume courtiers use to mask underlying odors. Through the heavy wooden doors, you can hear the rustle of silk and the soft murmur of voices as Queen Elizabeth I holds court. As you get closer, another smell pierces the floral mask, a sharp, metallic scent, like copper pennies and stagnant water, mingled with the earthy musk of bodies unfamiliar with soap. The Virgin Queen, Gloriana herself, sits resplendent on her throne, adorned in gold and pearls, her face painted white as fresh snow. She smiles, revealing teeth like autumn leaves, and when she speaks, courtiers lean in, not only out of reverence, but because the distance makes her words easier to understand. This is the woman who defeated the Spanish Armada and ruled England for 45 years with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. Yet beneath the magnificent facade were habits that would shock modern sensibilities. Before diving into these forgotten tales of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering history's hidden truths, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please, comment below to share where you're listening from. It's amazing to explore these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The reality of Elizabeth Tudor's personal hygiene reads like a catalog of medieval horrors, each habit more shocking than the last. Yet, to understand why England's greatest queen lived this way, we must first understand her world, a world where bathing was seen as dangerous, medicine was guesswork, and even royalty lived in conditions that would astonish us today. Elizabeth, I was actually progressive for her time. She bathed once every 3 months, whether she needed it or not, as recorded by her courtiers. Most of her subjects went months or even years without a full bath, fearing that water opened the pores, making the body susceptible to disease and evil spirits. When Elizabeth did bathe, it was a production akin to a theatrical performance. Servants would bring large copper tubs into her private chambers, filling them with water heated over massive kitchen fires. This water came from the Thames, already contaminated with the waste of London's growing population, thick with sewage, dead animals, and industrial runoff from the city's workshops and tanneries. The soap available at the time was a rough mix of animal fat, wood ash, and lye, which was more likely to strip the skin than clean it. The fat, often already rancid, came from pigs and cattle. The ash, carrying soot and residue, was gathered from palace fireplaces. When combined with lye, this mixture created a soap harsh enough to remove skin along with dirt. But 90 days is a long gap between baths. As the weeks went by, Elizabeth's body would accumulate layers of sweat, dead skin, and various substances she applied to mask her odor. By the end of her 3-month cycle, courtiers would sense the queen's approach well before she entered a room. Court documents from 1579 AD recount a revealing incident. The French ambassador complained in a letter to his king that he had to hold a pomander filled with sweet herbs to his nose during his audience with the queen. He noted that the royal presence emitted such odors as to make close conversation a trial of endurance. The ambassador's wife fainted during a formal dinner, not due to heat as publicly stated, but from the overwhelming smell coming from the royal table. Elizabeth's dental issues were notorious across Europe, becoming a subject of international gossip and diplomatic concern. By her 40s, her teeth had turned completely black from decay, and her smile was so unsettling that foreign ambassadors wrote detailed reports about it to their home countries. The Queen's dental problems stemmed from her insatiable appetite for sugar. In the 16th century, sugar was more valuable than gold, making it a status symbol. Elizabeth's daily diet included marchpane, sugared violets, candied fruits, comfits, and sweet wines. She would nibble on sugar throughout the day, letting crystals dissolve slowly in her mouth, bathing her teeth in sugar for hours. There was no understanding of dental hygiene, no brushing, flossing, or regular cleaning. The best care available was occasionally rinsing with wine or rose water, which contained sugar and actually sped up decay. Elizabeth's teeth began turning brown in her 30s, darkening to deep amber, and then black as decay progressed. Contemporary accounts describe how her teeth would sometimes crumble when she bit down, leaving fragments of blackened enamel on her lips. The pain was excruciating, sometimes leaving her unable to eat solid food for days, surviving on broths and liquid medicines. Court records show her holding her hand to her jaw during public appearances, a gesture courtiers recognized as a sign of dental agony. Dr. John Dee prescribed horrifying remedies, such as rinsing with urine, crushed pearls mixed with wine, and pressing hot iron against her jaw to burn out corruption. By her 50s, Elizabeth had lost several teeth entirely, and the remaining ones were loose in their sockets. Her breath became legendary. Courtiers likened it to the stench of a charnel house, even worse than a battlefield after 3 days in the sun. In 1590, the Venetian ambassador noted, "The Queen's teeth are so black and rotten that it's a wonder she can speak at all. The odor forced me to breathe through my mouth during our entire meeting." The Whig Horror Show. Elizabeth's renowned red hair was mostly fictional after her 30s, concealed beneath wigs that posed their own hygiene issues. Her hair loss was due to lead-based cosmetics used for her pale complexion and various treatments she tried to restore her natural hair. These wigs were made from hair sold by peasant women, often dirty and lice-ridden when acquired, with basic cleaning methods. They were sewn onto silk or linen bases with animal sinew threads, fitted with metal pins and combs that rusted from sweat. Elizabeth's scalp was aggravated by lead poisoning, leaving it with sores and lesions. Constant wig-wearing hindered proper healing, causing ongoing infections and irritation. The wigs were never washed, only brushed and dusted with powders, accumulating sweat, oil, and pollution. This mix of unwashed hair, decomposing matter, and perfumes created a distinctive odor that courtiers recognized as the Queen's approach. Lice thrived in the warm, moist environment under the wigs. Ladies-in-waiting spent hours daily picking lice from them, but the parasites returned quickly. The smell lingered in rooms after Elizabeth left, needing incense or open windows to clear it. The Queen's vanity about her hair matched her denial about its state. She boasted about her beautiful red locks, seemingly unaware everyone knew she wore wigs. Foreign ambassadors often described her hairpieces with thinly veiled amusement. The lead paint poison prison. Elizabeth's signature white face was achieved through daily applications of ceruse, a mix of white lead and vinegar that slowly poisoned her. This toxic blend was applied each morning with animal hair brushes, building up in layers that would crack and flake like old plaster. The lead, sourced from Cornish mines, where workers often died from exposure, was ground into fine powder that floated like dust, coating everything in Elizabeth's chambers. The vinegar, made from soured wine, added an acidic bite to the mix, eroding her skin while trapping poison against it. The application was torturous, burning as it was applied, making her eyes water and skin redden. Elizabeth had to stay completely still for up to an hour as it dried, unable to speak, eat, or drink. As the cyrus dried, it formed a stunning yet grotesque mask. The white surface looked smooth and pale, but underneath, her natural skin was being systematically damaged. The mask cracked throughout the day, needing constant touch-ups and regular mirror checks. Elizabeth never fully removed her makeup, instead adding new layers over the old ones, creating several layers of buildup. When she did try to remove it, the hardened serous had to be scraped off with ivory combs, often taking skin with it and leaving bloody scratches that would be covered with fresh poison the next morning. The lead poisoning affected her entire body. She experienced chronic fatigue, memory issues, and mood swings. Her hair fell out in clumps, her teeth became loose and discolored, and her breath took on a metallic taste she tried to mask with sweet wines. Beneath the white mask, Elizabeth's natural skin was a nightmare of sores, scars, and discoloration that worsened each year. Her lips were painted with cochineal crushed beetles mixed with oils that would go rancid in heat, developing foul smells that mingled with her breath. The clothing catastrophe. Elizabeth's magnificent gowns were never washed, never cleaned, nor allowed to rest. These garments, worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, became repositories of months or years of accumulated filth that no perfume could hide. The Queen owned over 3,000 gowns made from the finest silks, velvets, and brocades, adorned with pearls and precious stones. But their construction made cleaning impossible. Multiple fabric layers, delicate embroidery, and precious stones couldn't withstand harsh soaps. Instead, gowns were cleaned by airing, brushing, and re-perfuming. Elizabeth would wear each gown for days or weeks, allowing body odor, sweat, and bodily fluids to seep deep into the fabric. Rich materials absorbed these substances like sponges, creating permanent records of her bodily functions. The dressing process took hours and required many servants. First came the shift, a linen undergarment rarely washed, becoming yellowed and stiff with accumulated sweat. Over this went a whalebone and steel corset laced so tightly it restricted breathing and digestion, never washed, and becoming a breeding ground for bacteria. Elizabeth's gowns were prone to staining due to their light colors. White, silver, and pale gold showed every mark. A single wine drop would be visible across a room. The weight sometimes exceeded 50 pounds when fully jeweled, creating a greenhouse effect that trapped heat and moisture, causing profuse sweating absorbed by the innermost fabric layers. Her stockings, made of silk or fine wool, were rarely washed and would develop holes revealing yellowed, dirt-embedded toenails. Shoes became repositories of foot odor and fungal infections, with leather warping and staining, and interiors developing permanent smells, noticeable even when unworn. Elizabeth was so attached to certain gowns that she'd refuse to change for days, claiming they were favorites or brought good luck. This worsened the accumulation of filth as garments were worn for extended periods without any cleaning. Elizabeth's digestive system was a source of constant embarrassment, creating hygiene problems beyond just bad breath. Her rich diet, medications, and chronic ruling stress created perfect storms of digestive dysfunction throughout her life. The Queen's elaborate meals lasted hours and included dozens of dishes, roasted meats, rich sauces, sugary desserts, wines, and ales. Food was heavily spiced to mask spoilage, and cooking methods did little to kill bacteria thriving in pre-refrigeration times. Elizabeth's favorites were particularly problematic. Rich, fatty meats, like roasted swan and venison, difficult to digest and causing severe stomach upset. She consumed large sugar quantities in various forms, disrupting her body's natural balance and contributing to dental issues. Her eating habits were as problematic as her food choices. She'd eat quickly without proper chewing, rushing through meals between court ceremonies and diplomatic meetings. This hasty eating contributed to digestive problems and choking emergencies. Issues began almost immediately after eating, with severe bloating and gas that was both uncomfortable and embarrassing. In an era when bodily functions were shameful, especially for women, Elizabeth's digestive issues caused constant anxiety and humiliation. tight-fitting corsets, and multiple fabric layers worsened digestion, pressuring her stomach and intestines and causing severe pain. Elizabeth would sometimes loosen her stays during meals, which was highly improper and carefully concealed from public view. The gas was legendary among courtiers, who politely ignored sounds and smells from the royal person. Elizabeth would sometimes excuse herself from public events when problems became too severe, claiming illness when the real issue was far more embarrassing. Her digestive problems were worsened by medications. Mercury, prescribed for possible syphilis, was a powerful laxative, causing severe diarrhea and cramping. Herbal remedies contained toxic ingredients, causing nausea, vomiting, and other unpleasant symptoms. Elizabeth's entire mouth was a festering wound, creating problems far beyond bad breath. Her oral cavity became a breeding ground for bacteria and infection, creating smells and tastes that permeated every aspect of daily life. The Queen's tongue was often coated with a thick yellowish film, giving her breath additional putrid odor layers. This coating, caused by accumulated bacteria, dead cells, and food particles, was never properly cleaned. Without adequate oral hygiene, it built up over days and weeks, creating lasting tastes that Elizabeth described as bitter as wormwood. Her gums were swollen and bleeding, which was considered normal for her age and status. The constant bleeding mixed with saliva, creating metallic tastes she attempted to mask with sweet wines and candied fruits. Blood also stained her teeth and tongue, adding to the horror of her oral cavity. Elizabeth's saliva production was affected by medications and health issues. Sometimes, she'd produce excessive, thick, ropey saliva that collected in the corners of her mouth, creating visible strands when she spoke. Other times, her mouth would be uncomfortably dry, causing her tongue to stick to the roof of her mouth and making speech difficult. Sugar consumption created an ideal environment for bacterial growth. Sugar fed the bacteria living on her teeth and gums, causing them to multiply and produce acid, further damaging oral tissues. The cycle perpetuated itself. More sugar was consumed to mask decay, worsening oral health. Elizabeth's throat was chronically inflamed from constant mouth infections. She complained of a sore throat and difficulty swallowing, symptoms attributed to various illnesses, but likely caused by bacteria streaming down from her decaying mouth. Her attempts to mask oral problems were desperate. She chewed herbs like mint and rosemary, but these were quickly overwhelmed by the underlying rot. She experimented with mouth rinses made from wine, vinegar, and honey, but sugary solutions fed bacteria and worsened the problems. Elizabeth's solution to overwhelming hygiene issues was to douse herself in increasingly heavy perfumes and scented oils, which only made things worse. Perfumes, meant to mask natural odors, instead combined with them, creating unique and overwhelming stenches worse than the original smells. Her favorite perfume was civet musk, extracted from African civet cat anal glands. This musky animal scent was the height of luxury. But when combined with months of accumulated body odor, courtiers described it as like a rose garden built over a cesspit. Daily perfume application took almost as long as applying makeup. Servants dabbed various scents onto pulse points using soft brushes or fingers, and sprinkled perfumed powders into her clothing and hair, creating scented dust clouds that settled on everything. But 16th century perfumes were crude, made from animal products and plant extracts that went rancid in heat. Oils would turn sour, developing putrid smells that mixed with Elizabeth's body odor to create something truly nauseating. The combination of fresh and rancid perfumes created scents both sweet and revolting, like flowers rotting in stagnant water. Elizabeth's clothing became saturated with competing perfumes, creating portable scent clouds that followed her everywhere. different fragrances interacted with each other and her body chemistry, creating new, often unpleasant odors that had no resemblance to the original scents. Body heat caused perfumes to intensify and change throughout the day. Pleasant morning aromas became cloying and overwhelming by midday, and downright nauseating by evening. Elizabeth seemed unaware of this transformation, continuing to apply fresh perfume throughout the day, not realizing she was worsening the problem. The Queen's perfume collection was extensive and expensive, imported from all over Europe and the Middle East. She owned fragrances made from rare flowers, exotic spices, and precious resins, each costing more than most people's annual earnings. However, no amount of money could buy a perfume capable of masking months of unwashed body odors. The foot horror show. Elizabeth's feet were perhaps the most neglected part of her body, hidden away in silk stockings and elaborate shoes, yet suffering from conditions that would have shocked even the most experienced physician. Her feet had become a source of constant pain and embarrassment, plagued by fungal infections, ingrown toenails, and various ailments worsened by her poor hygiene habits. Caring for Elizabeth's feet was a daily ordeal that none of her servants welcomed. Her stockings, made from the finest silk and wool, would be peeled away to reveal feet that bore little resemblance to the delicate appendages described in courtly poetry. The skin was often white and waterlogged from constant moisture, with patches of fungal infection creating cheesy, rancid odors. Elizabeth's toenails had grown long and thick, becoming yellowed and brittle from constant moisture and lack of proper care. The nails would often curl under, creating painful pressure against her toes and sometimes growing into the skin. Her attempts to trim her toenails were crude, often resulting in cuts and infections that took weeks to heal. The spaces between Elizabeth's toes were breeding grounds for fungal infections, thriving in the warm, moist environment of her shoes. Skin would become white and peeling, with infections spreading to the toenails, causing them to become thick and discolored. The smell from these infections was distinctive and overwhelming, described by ladies-in-waiting as resembling rotting cheese mixed with vinegar. The Queen's shoes were works of art that had become repositories of foot odor and bacterial growth. Made from the finest leather and decorated with jewels and embroidery, these shoes were never cleaned or aired out, instead accumulating months of sweat, dead skin, and various fluids seeping from Elizabeth's infected feet. The leather would become stained and warped, and the interiors developed permanent odors, noticeable even when the shoes weren't being worn. Elizabeth's habit of wearing the same shoes for days or weeks exacerbated her foot problems. Constant moisture from sweat and lack of air circulation created ideal conditions for bacterial and fungal growth. The Queen occasionally complained of burning and itching in her feet, symptoms she blamed on various causes, but likely due to infections affecting her lower extremities. Her foot odor was so distinct that servants could sometimes detect her approach by smell alone. This odor lingered in rooms long after she left, necessitating open windows and incense to clear the air. Foreign ambassadors occasionally commented on strange odors around her throne, unaware they were sensing the smell from her feet. The sleeping chamber horror. Elizabeth's bedchamber was a concentrated repository of hygiene failures, where months of accumulated filth created barely breathable air. Her sleeping quarters, meant to be sanctuaries of rest and privacy, became nightmares of odor and unsanitary conditions. The royal bed was both a masterpiece of craftsmanship and a monument to neglect. This elaborate four-poster, made of the finest carved oak and adorned with gold cloth hangings, cost more than most castles. However, the bed linens, changed perhaps monthly if lucky, had become stiff with accumulated sweat, bodily fluids, and various ointments and powders applied to her skin. Sheets made from the finest imported linen and softer silk when new had transformed into a canvas-like material, yellowed and stained with bodily fluids, deeply soaked into the fibers. Stains mapped Elizabeth's nocturnal activities, with dark patches from sweating through difficult nights, yellowish areas from bladder failures, and reddish spots from sores and lesions. The mattress, stuffed with down and feathers meant for comfort, had become a breeding ground for insects and bacteria, absorbing moisture and odors that no airing could eliminate. Never cleaned or replaced, it accumulated years of bodily fluids deep in its core. Elizabeth's nightgown, of fine linen and lace, became a second skin of accumulated filth, worn for weeks until it was so stiff with dried bodily fluids it became uncomfortable. The garment yellowed and stiffened, developing permanent stains marking her sleeping habits. The sleeping chamber was kept tightly closed during winter to conserve heat, trapping all odors inside and creating a thick, oppressive atmosphere. Air became heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, chamber pots, stale perfume, and various medications surrounding the royal bed. Servants entering in the morning often had to gag or hold their breath, struggling not to vomit from the overwhelming stench. As Elizabeth entered her final decade, her hygiene issues reached horror crescendos, unimaginable even by her earlier standards. Years of poor hygiene, lead poisoning, and untreated medical conditions had transformed the once glorious queen into a living symbol of decay and neglect. The queen's skin was a patchwork of sores, scars, and discoloration that no makeup could hide. Lead poisoning had left her face pitted and scarred, with deep lesions that wept and crusted before being covered with new layers of toxic cosmetics. Her natural skin tone turned a sickly yellow-green from liver damage and internal problems caused by medications and poor diet. Elizabeth lost all her hair, leaving her scalp covered in infected sores and scar tissue. Her wigs grew heavier and more elaborate to compensate for baldness, but the constant pressure only worsened her scalp issues. During public appearances, she sometimes scratched her head frantically, drawing blood and creating new wounds that took weeks to heal. Her remaining teeth were so loose she could barely chew solid food. Her diet was reduced to broths, soft breads, and liquid medicines, yet even these could cause pain. Constant mouth infections spread to her throat and sinuses, causing chronic inflammation and making speaking and breathing difficult. Elizabeth's body odor reached an almost supernatural intensity. The mix of unwashed skin, infected wounds, rotting teeth, and rancid perfumes created a scent described by courtiers as the smell of death itself. Her presence was detectable from rooms away, and servants sometimes fled at her approach. The queen's mental state had deteriorated, possibly due to lead poisoning and accumulated toxins. She would forget recent conversations, repeat herself endlessly, or fly into violent rages over minor slights. Her behavior became increasingly erratic and unpredictable, making daily management difficult for courtiers. When Elizabeth Tudor died on March 24, 1603, at Richmond Palace, there was profound silence in the death chamber. The woman who had dominated English politics for nearly half a century was gone, and with her, the elaborate fictions that had concealed her hygiene disasters from public view. The aftermath revealed the full extent of the problems hidden during her lifetime. Servants preparing her body for burial found a woman barely resembling the portraits that had made her famous. The rooms where she lived and died retained distinctive odors for months after her passing, with some palace areas sealed off and abandoned, too contaminated for other uses. Now, standing once again in the shadows of Greenwich Palace, the summer morning air carries only the scent of roses from carefully tended gardens. The horror has been sanitized, the truth polished until it gleams like the golden facades that once hid such revolting reality. If you listen closely to the wind through ancient stones. You might still hear the whispered testimonies of long-dead servants, the gasps of shocked ambassadors, and the labored breathing of a queen who learned too late that some crowns are heavier than others, and that some victories cost more than defeat. Elizabeth Tudor's greatest enemy was not Spain or France, but the mirror reflecting the cost of denying basic human needs. The woman who claimed to be married to England died only wedded to her own decay, and the realm she left behind had to air out palaces and begin anew, hoping the new king's reign would be sweeter than the 45 long, putrid years of the last queen.